Welcome everybody to this very special event presented by the Temple of Understanding. It is my great honor to introduce to you Dr. Vandana Shiva, who is joining us from India, and Grove Harris, who is the United Nations representative for the Temple of Understanding, who's joining us from the US. And I'd also like to introduce our Executive Director and Chair of the Board, Alison Van Dyke, who is moderating our online chat today. I am Susie Mazzoli, and I am the Program Director at the Temple of Understanding. And I'd just like to offer a little bit of information about the webinar today and about the series. So this is the first of our speaker series for this year for the Eco Justice for All program, which incorporates our outreach in the area of environmental awareness and advocacy. And we present a diverse range of perspectives, from scientific to spiritual views on the climate. And our speakers offer a variety of solutions that we can all do easily and effectively in our everyday lives, as well as intricate and complex global solutions. World religious leaders, spiritual visionaries, Indigenous leaders, scientists, social scientists, environmental activists, artists, musicians, writers, youth and elders, local and global people all come together to address the urgency of the climate crisis through this ongoing series, which is speaker series and an interview series. And all of these are available on our website, templeofunderstanding.org. So please join our mailing list, and then you're going to hear about our upcoming events, what's happening next month. And then to finish up, if I could please ask you after the webinar to have a look at our Forum 2020, which is on our website, where you'll find some other videos that we have done already with Dr. Shiva on the climate emergency, and also some keynote speeches, prayers and panel discussions from our Forum 2020 last year. And I believe also that some of our speakers and panelists are with us today on our webinar, so hopefully they'll be able to jump in and ask some questions as well. So again, thank you kindly for joining us. Namaste. And again, from very deep in my heart, thank you so much, Dr. Vandana Shiva, for your precious time shared with us today. And now I turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Grove Harris.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to welcome our guest with just a bit of the prologue to her book. Vandana Shiva is a world-renowned environmental thinker and activist, a leader in the International Forum on Globalization, of the Slow Food Movement, director of Navdanya and of the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology, and a tireless crusader for farmers, peasants, and women's rights. She's an author of multiple books and the winner of numerous awards. I think you know some about her as we've been sending out more detailed information. So with no further ado, Vandana, I am so grateful that you've been able to join us today. Welcome your opening remarks and then a discussion with our esteemed audience as well.
Thank you very much, Grove, and thank you, Susie, and thank you to the Temple of Understanding. You know, it's often said that our body is a temple. And as a temple, what is nourishing it, the sacrament, is food. We have been made to so rapidly forget in a few decades of industrial agriculture that the main cycle of life is the nutrition cycle. But what is a nutrition cycle? The movement of food from the soil to the plants, to us, to animals, and back from us to the soil as our gratitude, as our gift, as our thank you. And everyone knows that we are what we eat. When we eat healthy, we are healthy. When we eat unhealthy food or toxic food, we are unhealthy. I think even the pandemic that has basically eaten up 2020 is a consequence of invasion into forests for agribusiness. Now, if we were doing the right kind of farming for the sanctity of food and the sanctity of land, as we have done in India, you don't abandon your land, you care for it. And you farm it right, you can be there on that piece of land for millennia. And one of the facts that the farmers of India are rising is because they see themselves as custodians of this legacy of permanence, of care. And a statement one of the older farmers made is something I've always said, that farming is about nourishing the soul and society. And he used Urdu words. He said, this is not about a narrow issue. It is about the Jameen, which is the sacred land, and the Jameer, which is the soul. That's how deep the issue of food is. So if food is life and food is the currency of life, then the food emergency is a multiple level emergency. First of all, it is, I would call it an ontological emergency, that we've stopped recognizing that food is life. We have reduced food to a commodity. And then the commodity moves where the highest profits are there. If the highest profits through subsidies are in biofuel and animal feed, that's where GMO soya will move. And if the subsidies make it more and more viable to grow more GMO soya, and subsidies and the craziness of thinking that this is a renewable energy, that we can invade the Amazon and destroy the Amazon for growing GMO soya, it is destroying not just the biodiversity, it's destroying the climate of the planet as well as the Amazon. And every new pandemic has come from the forests. It's just, you know, when the pandemic first hit, this was the first science that was coming out, but somehow it's got silenced along the way. And even the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity admitted that we are looking at the wrong thing. We are looking at symptoms when we should be looking at causes. And the causes are the violence against nature and ecosystems. I call it invasions into the homes of indigenous cultures who cohabit the forest with other beings and other species. They were called primitive for being able to sustain themselves over thousands of years. And progress was defined as the power to invade. So the current system has not only created a intellectual and philosophical emergency of forgetting that food is life and reducing food to a commodity, it has actually created an actual emergency in terms of people not having access to food. So it was the case that, you know, in the British turned, I mean, the East India Company made India its big colony. It was created to colonize India. And the British got rich by $45 trillion in that short period of conquest and rule over us. But where did they, of course, got hold of the spice, they got hold of our textiles, but they also extracted from the peasants a rent, a tax. It was half of the produce. And this led to famines. In bad years, 60 million people died. 60 million people died in India. It wasn't that there wasn't enough food, but it wasn't being left with the people. And hunger and the food emergency is a result of an inhuman and unjust system. There should be no hunger in the world because the earth provides enough. And then if in a bad year, you don't have enough, normally we had cultures. I visited villages just about 2 weeks ago in the desert area of Rajasthan, where we have programs for seed saving and organic farming. And I heard about a village that used to store grain in the desert, knowing there'll be a drought. They used to store grain collectively for 5 years. you could never have a famine, because even if 2 years the rain failed, you had 3 years extra grain. And I have watched how the World Bank came and said, oh, why do you store? Why do you store at the household level? You should be storing at the national level. And why do you store at the national level? You should be selling it off and letting it be privatized. That is what the farmers of India are protesting against. The commodification of food. And with it, the destruction of their livelihoods. Because in India, we call farmers Anna Data. Anna is sacred food. Data is the one who gives you food in sanctity. And actually behind me is a painting from South India that was gifted to me of Annapurna, the divinity of food in abundance. She should be our guide to the future. And even that mountain in Nepal called Annapurna is basically dedicated to her. So we had famine, and then we got independence, and we got rid of it. 1942 was the big Great Bengal famine. And then we created laws, and it's those laws that are being dismantled. Because in 91, the World Bank said, no, you can't have food sovereignty. You've got to have profits. You've got to allow global corporations to come in. You have to allow Monsantos to come and control seed. You have to allow Cargill to trade freely. And you have to allow the Pepsis to destroy your indigenous foods under pseudo safety standards. All this has then combined to a world system that is designed to create hunger. Most people, I don't think, know or remember that what is called the Arab Spring were actually food riots. The year 2008, the subprime crisis had led to a collapse of Wall Street. And then the big money-making people said, oh, this is a little uncertain. So the two things, if we financialize this and turn it into a speculation on the casino, the real thing will be with us and we'll continue to make money. And the two things they thought of was land and food. And the banks at that time were saying, don't you love the prices going up? Because in terms of returns, that goes up. But for the poor person who lose their access to bread, it's hunger. So people were marching in Egypt, carrying bread. It wasn't covered because the global system that's built around a food injustice doesn't allow the true story to be told. And not only have we now a permanent 1 billion people hungry, permanently. Earlier, hunger used to be local in space and time, and then it went away. But now permanently, 1 billion people are hungry, and another 2 billion are sick because of bad food. And the World Food Programme has warned that because of the COVID crisis, we are now in a hunger pandemic. There are more than 1 million people on the verge of starvation, and 300,000 will starve every day if nothing changes. Every day, 300,000. And Oxfam just brought out a report called the Hunger Virus. It says the pandemic is the final straw for millions of people already struggling with the impacts of conflict, climate change, inequality, and a broken food system that has impoverished millions of food producers and workers. Meanwhile, those at the top are continuing to make a profit. 8 of the biggest food and drink companies paid out over 18 million to shareholders, but the big technology giants walked away with trillions, 14 trillion, I think it is, by further destroying the food system. So we are in a literal food emergency. And this emergency is fueling new ways of making more money out of hunger and sickness. Why did I get involved in the agriculture and food issue? You know, I did my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory. I've studied physics. I've been an ecological activist, and I might as well mention that my life as an ecological activist began when I went to visit my favorite forests and streams before I was going to Canada to do my doctorate work. And I saw the forest had gone and the stream had become a trickle. And that's when I heard about movement, high reaches, women saying, we won't let you cut the trees because logging and deforestation is causing landslides and floods. You know what a huge irony and tragedy is? The recent disaster that has taken place in my region, in Uttarakhand, is exactly in the village Raini, where the first Chipko happened, where 50 years ago women were warning that you cannot continue to violate nature with no consequence. So I became an ecological activist, but I was looking at forests and rivers, and I was doing my quantum theory. And then 84, violence erupted in the state of Punjab, where I had done my MSc honors in particle physics. And I had known it as a peaceful state and a prosperous state, the most prosperous part of India. If any of you look, 84 will be remembered as the year when the Golden Temple, the most sacred shrine of the Sikhs, was invaded. The military was sent. The Sikhs felt violated. Indira Gandhi was assassinated. That same year, on the 2nd of December, a pesticide plant owned then by Union Carbide, now by Dow, which has merged with DuPont, which has then merged with Pioneer, and they call themselves Corteva. They find the most beautiful sounding names. I call them the poison cartel. So when I saw this happen in Punjab, I asked the United Nations University, for whom I was doing a major program on conflicts. I said, can I please study this conflict? It troubles me deeply because there has to be deep roots. And so I did my book called The Violence of the Green Revolution, and it is available in the United States from Kentucky University Press. It's available in India from Natraj Publishers. I wrote that book, and in the process, I had to start understanding from scratch. The three things I learned while researching that book was, first, my question was, where did the chemicals come from? And I realized they came from Hitler's Germany. And they weren't German. DuPont and IG Farben, Monsanto and Bayer were locked like this in these experiments. In Auschwitz, DuPont was present, making the synthetic rubber. They were working with IG Farben to work on Xylon B, which was used to gas the victims of concentration camps. And Rockefeller, as Standard Oil, was supplying the fossil fuels to make the explosives, which became the synthetic fertilizers. So that's the first lesson I learned. The chemicals in agriculture come from war, and that's why they continue to harm the earth and harm people. The second thing I learned is the story we are repeatedly told that chemical agriculture, modern farming, GMOs produce more food. I realized that when they talk of food, they're really talking of commodity. And when they talk of yields, they're talking about the extraction of a commodity from an ecosystem. It does not measure what state you left the land in. Did you leave it more impoverished, or did you leave it richer? You do not, it's not built into this. What was the state of the farmer? Did the farmer get poorer, or did the farmer get richer? Again, the protests of India are because for 3 decades of globalization, the farmers of India have been experiencing the experiment of globalization and getting poorer. We've lost 400,000 farmers to suicide. Farmers' incomes have crashed. Farmers are being driven off their land, and they don't want to leave the land. Not only because culturally they are children of the earth, but economically they know in the system there is no place for them outside farming. And that's why they take dignity. The third thing I learned is a manipulation of data has allowed the illusion that these systems are necessary to feed the world. And I want to just quote from you share with you. So just today I was sent a new paper published literally February 2021. McKinsey, which gives all the advice around the world, they've interviewed Neil Gutterson of Corteva. And he is saying, he's basically saying we've got to get bigger to apply the technologies that we have. And I'll come back to this issue later. But here he's saying we have to be bigger to be more efficient. But agriculture, even in the United States, is mostly pursued on family farms. And for them, that's a problem. Consequently, there's a tension between what you need to do to serve a growing population and the myths some people have about how food should be produced. I know I'm among the people being targeted by the myths that some people have. No, you have the myth. You have the myth that you're feeding the world. You feed nobody. You poison everybody. Women feed the world. Small farmers feed the world. 80% of the food we eat comes from small farms, even today. Yeah. So we had Hitler, the 30s and 40s. We became independent. We had independent, you know, I want to share with you the most beautiful writings at the time of our independence. We became free. And the two things I want to quote, I want to show you, because we've been bringing out a report. These are the famine images of 42. And these are the images of women rising in 42. But at that time, Gandhi said in 1947, before he died, the first lesson we must learn is of self-help and self-reliance. If we assimilated this lesson, we shall be truly free. No one needs to be hungry in this fertile, abundant land. And our first agriculture minister was a very close friend of my parents. And in fact, it's the books that are lying in my parents' library that helped me decode what the Green Revolution was doing. His name was K.M. Munshi. And this is when we become independent. And he's saying in 52, he says, no, 51, 1 year before I'm born. He used to visit us all the time. He's saying, study the life cycle in the village. This is agriculture. He's saying, study the life cycle in the village under your charge in both its aspect, hydrological and nutritional. Nutritional is the food cycle. Find out where the cycle has been disturbed and estimate the steps necessary for restoring it. This is regeneration. Nothing is too mean and nothing too difficult for the person who believes that the restoration of life cycle is not only essential for freedom and happiness of India, but is essential for her very existence. Exactly what the Indian farmers are saying on the streets today. But of course, today they've been named terrorists. Today they have been named anti-national. You know, 3/4 of India is suddenly anti-national. Quite fascinating, quite fascinating. And they basically nourish the soil. And these are our freedom fighters. These are the makers of independent India. We then started to grow food. We became independent. But 65, we had a drought. And then there was a price rise. And India asked for importing a little more wheat. And we were told we won't give you wheat, but you take the chemicals, take the Green Revolution. By then, the chemical package was ready. And Bordlaw, who had worked in DuPont Defense Lab, interestingly, same DuPont, yeah, he had worked in the defense lab. He was put on the job of pushing chemicals in agriculture. And that's why we made the dwarf varieties. I won't go too much into detail if someone wants to go further down that road. Well, so the Green Revolution was the first step. By 84, the farmers were rising and protesting. By 87, I was introduced to how this poison cartel wanted to own the seed. And now they wanted GMOs and patents. And I always say GMO for them means God move over. Yeah, we are the creators now. Yeah, we are the inventors. We are the creators. We will take the royalties. And once again, the attitude of war came fully back. So there are two applications of GMOs. One is making plants resistant to Roundup so that you can kill everything green around the plant. and the other is a Bt toxin put into the plant. So one is called Bt crops and the other is called herbicide-resistant crops. Did herbicide-resistant crop control weeds? No, the weeds are super weeds. And so in America now, you have all kinds of new problems with more lethal herbicides being used. And I think the use of Roundup has shot up because of Roundup-resistant crops, 15-fold, 1,500%. And the monarch butterfly is dying, plant species are dying, and our gut is dying. You know, so much research is now being done on the issue of glyphosate. There are more than nearly 100,000 cancer cases in the courts of America because it is proven that glyphosate and Roundup causes cancer. On the issue of Bt cotton, it was illegally brought to India, and the advertisements used to say you won't need to spray. 3 years ago, 130 farmers died of pesticide poisoning because they had to spray because the pests were so intense. The pests have outsmarted Monsanto. They're now resistant. But Monsanto thought it could squeeze the last dollar from the Indian peasants and increase the price from 5 rupees a kilo of seed to 4,000 rupees a kilo. And the seed was not reliable. So it failed and failed and failed. Farmers were left in debt. 400,000 farmers who committed suicide. Of this, 85% is in the GMO cotton area because we have data on where the suicides are. And if you just map the suicide data on the GMO cotton area, you find the 85% concentration is in these areas. So where are we at now with 60 years of using more chemicals in agriculture in India, about the same time from 1966 onwards? We have linked to the food emergency and ecological emergency. 50% of the greenhouse gases come from industrial globalized agriculture. Said this before on a Temple of Understanding talk, but 11 to 15% is from agriculture production itself. 15 to 18% is invading forests like the Amazon. They call it land use change. Processing, transport, packaging, plastic, aluminium is 15 to 20%. And because you are privileging uniformity and long distance transport, there's a lot of waste, about 4%. Add this all together, 50% of the greenhouse gases. So if you're passionate about climate, begin with finding solutions through food. Biodiversity, crop diversity, 93% gone. 80% of insect species. If the chemicals you're using that first kill people in the concentration camps, then killed plants, and you created a war on bugs, that's the advertising, war on bugs. The war on bugs means the bugs will disappear, 80%. In the last 3 decades of globalization, water 75%, desertification 75%. This is extinction by design. And this extinction by design is not just, so there's hunger by design, the first element of the food emergency, and then there's extinction by design. But the extinction is now, it began with pushing certain humans to extermination because they were declared inferior. It moved into other species, and it's coming back to humans again. The farmers who are protesting in India are refusing to go extinct. They're saying we will not be made extinct. 80% of the food, as I said, that we eat comes from small farms, which use only 25% of the land. Most of the land that's under forest would be left under forest if we grew food only on small farms. There's a lot of talk of rewilding. All you have to do is change the industrial food system. That's all you have to do. And the planet will rewild herself. We don't have to rewild. And as I've said to some people who think the way to protect the earth is get farmers off the land, I say, but you forget that we are part of nature. And getting rid of a part of nature does not solve the problem. Getting rid of the way of thinking among some of the humans that have caused this destruction is the real solution. So industrial agriculture gives us only 20% of food, uses 75% of the land. And if this was to move to about 30, 40%, we'd have a very, very dead planet. We'd have a very dead planet. Our work in Navdanya, and for those who want to follow up more, please visit the website of Navdanya. You will also find the courses we offer, and I will make sure I send to the Temple of Understanding the list of courses. And tomorrow, I'm in fact going to be offering us a course on seed for 3 days on the living seed and biodiversity. And if any of you want to inquire about it, you can write to Earth University at navdanya.net. Earth University at navdanya.net. And I said, I'm not going to measure an extractive indicator. I'm going to measure the health of the system. So we evolved health per acre and nutrition per acre. And by protecting the earth, growing biodiversity, giving back in gratitude, we can feed 2 times India's population. With the lockdown, I spent so much time on the beautiful biodiversity farm that has grown by saving seeds. And it gives me, the plants give me so much joy. The biodiversity gives me so much joy. The birds, every day, different species are coming back. And animals too, because the forest has no food for them anymore. The elephants have no food in the forest. The boar has no food in the forest. The deer have no food in the forest. So our farm has very frequent visitors from the forest next door to try and get food. Where should we go in the future? We've got to remember that food is sacred. Food is the currency of life. And in India, we have an entire Upanishad called the Taittiriya Upanishad, which says, Annam bahu kurvita. The highest dharma, dharma is the right action, the right livelihood. The highest dharma is the growing and giving of good food. And the highest adharma, with the equivalent of which is sin in the Western Abrahamic religions, the highest adharma is not growing food or growing bad food and giving bad food. So food is where dharma is organized. And we know, scientifically, we know we can feed the world, we can reverse climate change, we can regenerate biodiversity. All of this is now available in practice and in science. But those who learned their science, killing people in concentration camps, have other ideas. So Monsanto, before it was bought out by Bayer, and it is in my book that Grove showed, the book on oneness versus the 1%, they had just bought the biggest climate data corporation and the biggest soil data corporation, because they're now looking at digitalization of agriculture. And Bill Gates has entered agriculture in a very big way. A large part of my book is on Bill Gates. And last year, or just exactly a year ago, he launched something called Gates Ag One. Gates Ag One. One agriculture for the whole world, controlled by him. Linked through digital control, Microsoft programs. He's taken control of all the seeds of the world. He is patenting them and pirating them through genomic reading, undercutting UN treaties like the Biodiversity Convention, its Nagoya Protocol, undercutting the FAO treaty on seed and prior permission to get access to seed. He's undercutting every law. Gates Ag One is a continuation of the path of the poison cartel. He has programs with Bayer. He has taken over all the research, World Bank research institutes called the Consultative Group of International Agriculture Research. And for those who want to know more, we recently did a report called The Gates to a Global Empire, so that people realize what's happening and they prepare themselves to protect their food, to protect their freedom, and to protect their sacred duty to life on Earth. DuPont, we mentioned DuPont. DuPont is linked to the Green Revolution varieties. DuPont is linked to the Bhopal disaster. DuPont, the chief whose quote I was reading, has gone ahead and said, he said, we will have to work on making farms bigger. And the 3 laws that Indian farmers, which are really 1991 World Bank laws that they're protesting, is they know their land will go. If they're in debt through contacts and unjust contracts, their land will go, you know. So Mr. Corteva is saying, initial business model was about farmers selling to other farmers. No, no. Farmers sold to those who weren't farmers so that they could have food. A more integrated business model allows more solution-based delivery. This is bad English. You know, these guys are getting away, ruining the language, yeah? A business model that allows for more solution-based delivery. Solution-based, solution to what? What is the problem? Are you solving the climate problem by using more chemicals? Are you solving the unemployment problem? No, you're not. You're planning to get rid of farmers. You want farming without farmers and food without farms. That's the new slogan of the poison cartel and the silicon billionaires. Impossible Burger is part of this. Lab food, patented. This will make the hunger crisis bigger, but it will also make our health crisis deeper, because health is a continuum from the soil to the plants to our gut microbiome. And the richer the diversity of crops we grow, and the richer the diversity in the soil, the more is the nourishment that the food we eat. If you grow only GMO soya, sprayed with Roundup, then you make fake lab ingredients. Then you are basically intensifying the war against our body through our gut. So Mr. Corteva goes on, and we have very sophisticated solution-based delivery. We will use sensors, water sensors, nitrogen sensors, little robot running through a field and measuring things, and that'll allow us to get rid of 20 people who collect the data today. But what they're not saying, and it'll help us get rid of the farmers who farm with care. So we have two paradigms. A paradigm of knowing that food is the currency of life and the basis of our health and our identity. And then you have the idea of food as a commodity, becoming more and more anonymous, more and more fabricated, more and more fake. And then you have the idea that the real food comes from care for the earth. She gives us food. We just care for her. We are not producing. We are nurturing. We are caring. So for me, agriculture and food production is earth care. We do it right, we get abundance, because she has the power to give us abundance. The other system is poison the earth to death and take all intelligence out of plants, take all intelligence out of human beings, leave the farmers initially without knowledge and then with no place in farming. That's the challenge we face today. That's the watershed we are in. And therefore, each of us has an amazing role to play because we all eat. And the pandemic has shown us that good food is the best medicine. Yeah. There's, of course, this desperate attempt to think that if you can eat junk and somehow be rescued by a vaccine. No, if you eat junk, there is no vaccine that will sort your sicknesses out. And we have to honor food again. It is the sacrament. And honoring food, we have to honor the farmers who grow the food. We have to honor our capacity to be food producers. I say the next level of liberation of humanity is to return to the earth, for each of us to be a farmer, at least in our minds, by respecting the farmer who grew our food. But if nothing else, in one potted plant, one herb, to say, I will take care of the seed, I will take care of the plant, and I will forever remember that my food comes from soil and seed and sunshine. And I will protect the earth's sacred gifts with all my love and all my passion and all my resistance to falsehood and false claim, because this is the old lie being repeated now through amplification of the digital media. And sadly, it's not just a lie. It's a lie as industrial agriculture, but it is that experiment to exterminate that began in Hitler's lab. So we have to stop both. We have to stop that experiment because we can live better on this earth as human beings together. There is no superiority. No one's too inferior. No one has the right to exterminate any other species, any other human being. And secondly, now there is enough research, including from FAO, that most of the food we eat comes from small farms. Agroecology produces more food. My own work now for 40 years has shown that this is the case. Let's live the truth of food. Let us celebrate the truth of food. That is the revolution of our times. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva, for some very passionate and multi-layered and complex comments. One request, I want to ask you to look directly into your camera. Perfect. Just have a little more contact with those who are from the distance asking you questions, and we've had a number of them come up. Would you mind on a separate but related topic to speak to us about the Uttarakhand flooding disaster, environmental crisis very close to your home and our hearts?
Yeah. So in the 1970s, a disaster had taken place because a forest was logged. That's when the Chipko movement that inspired me started, exactly in the village where the new disasters happened. In 78, another logging took place and created a landslide and a lake of 4 miles. And when that lake burst, the flood went all the way to Calcutta. The ground floor in many buildings in Calcutta was underwater because of that flood. In 2013, there was an intense disaster. 6,000 people died. More than 100,000 went missing. And I did studies on this in the Kedarnath Valley because we work there, work with farmers on seed saving. And that's where we started the Earth Democracy and Living Democracy movement in that valley in 1999 on June the 5th, World Environment Day. So in that disaster, 3 things had happened. The glacial melt because of climate change had formed a lake. Heavy rain came in the first 2 days because of climate change, which burst the lake. And also this heavy rain caused flood. There was massive, crazy dam building because we've forgotten our sacred rivers, like our Ganges, are sacred. We are seeing them as this much kilowatt energy to be extracted through hydroelectric dams. This is a violation, to me, of our sacred Ganga. And so many tunnels are being built in order to divert the river and then generate the electricity. And we did mapping that year in 2013, that every landslide was above a tunnel where the blasting and explosives. By the way, this brings me back to DuPont. In 1910, DuPont had written a booklet for farmers of America, Farming with Dynamite. Right now, we are doing development with dynamite in the mountains. And this particular valley, this particular disaster that happened, there are 2 dams that are being built, and similar tunnels and blasting is happening. And the local people had protested. They said this is destabilizing the mountain. So they're still trying to figure out. Initially, they said a lake. There is no glacial lake there. But there was a landslide, and the landslide took with it the snows that had just fallen. And together they then fell and then blocked the river like they did in 1970, 1978. The river blockage, and when it was released, it led to the flooding. It's again a combination of climate change, of course, but maldevelopment. And most of the people who died in this particular disaster are workers at those dam sites. The dams are gone. They've been washed away. But the unjust system we have is the dams will be compensated and will be rebuilt. The people will not. And there is no way you can compensate nature. You cannot put those forests back. You cannot put those mountains back. You cannot put that soil back. And that this irreversibility of destruction is something that we've become dumb at not seeing, because there are 2 anesthesias that our governments have been subjected to. First is the anesthesia of growth. Just keep measuring growth. Keep extracting kilowatt hours. Doesn't matter if the river died. Yeah. And the second is development. And development is that which extracts growth. Yeah. So, but development was originally a term of biology, with that which nourishes a seed becomes a tree, and that's development. But now when the mountain disappears, it's called development. So very, very many ontological confusions. My colleagues are leaving tomorrow to go up and do absolutely on the ground survey, scientific, as well as talk to the women. And I've told them particularly to talk to the women who were active in the 70s for the Chipko movement, so that we can remind the world that it is time to listen to the earth and listen to women.
Thank you. I'd like to push you even a little further into this issue. One of the questions that's come in is asking about, I think it's pronounced bauxite, a mineral that's required for renewables, such as wind turbines and solar panels. How is it tenable to support solutions that require these minerals at the same time, if they also might require flooding?
Okay. So bauxite is the raw material for aluminium. Till about 20 years ago, most of the aluminium was used for aeroplanes and cars. Increasingly, it is used for renewable energy and for packaging of food. Those figures I gave on climate change. I have worked with indigenous communities that have fought bauxite mining. You know, I normally work where I am, but if I'm invited by the women of Coca-Cola to shut down Coca-Cola, I go to Plachimada. So I was invited to Niyamgiri in Orissa. Niyam means the law, Giri means the mountain, and this bauxite mountain is their sacred deity. They call it the mountain that upholds our sacred law. And they said, you cannot mine this, because when you mine it, you will disturb our sacred law. And they fought so hard. Out of this mountain comes 32 streams. For you all, you might have seen the pollution that turning bauxite into alumina causes, huge red lakes. And there have been disasters of the leakage of these red mud lakes. I was invited by my government in 1982 to look at mining of limestone in my valley. That's what brought me back to Dehradun, my home. And that's when I came back to this building, which used to be my mother's cowshed. She said, you want to leave your job? Take the cowshed. So my research foundation began in my mother's cowshed. My mother inspires me and the cows inspire me. And we stopped the mining because we could show that the limestone left in the mountains created a bigger economy when you take the whole economy into account, the water, the agriculture, the livelihoods. The same is the case with bauxite mining. Leaving the bauxite in the mountain creates a bigger economy than one man, Mr. Anil Agarwal of Vedanta, mining it and selling it. I personally feel that any system that offers itself as an ecological solution needs to look at the system itself, the whole system. Not just the source of energy. Did it come from the sun? But what are the resources that came into it? Did you take land away from the peasants? In India, we have so many movements against wind farms and solar farms because they're grabbing peasant land. So there's the justice question, there's the renewability of resources question, not just of energy. We cannot be reductionist. I call this the mechanistic reductionist mindset. And the ecological crisis is being caused by that mechanistic reductionist machine of money making. That's how I define it in my book, Oneness versus 1%. We can think ecologically, we have that capacity. Let the environmental movement not slip into the way of thinking of those who have caused the damage. As Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem by the same way of thinking as that which led to the creation of those problems. And externalities is one aspect of reductionist thinking. Anyone who offers a renewable solutions to look at the full system of renewability, of communities, renewability of justice, renewability of humanity, renewability of the earth and her limited resources, and then move forward.
Thank you so much. You're so right that we need to recycle everything and reuse it, and that will allow us to continue the development of what we need for these new kinds of energy. If I could shift your attention back to the small farmers now, I have a question from Brian Rossborough about how might small farms actually use science and data to their benefit, still as small farms, to protect soil, seed, water, the sacred nutritional cycle. Is there a way that these new datas and technologies can serve small farmers rather than be applied from above and take away from what the small farmers have?
Yeah. To answer that question, we really need to, again, look at the system as a whole.
Yeah.
So does a farmer who knows their soil not know their soil? They know their soil. What does the data collecting surveillance instrument do? It collects that data of the soil and sells it back to the farmer. So if you're willing to accept that the farmer does not know the soil as soil and needs someone else who's using surveillance systems to collect the data and sell it back, then yes, that bit has a role. What is the place? It's not, what is data? Data is the piece of extraction of information. Yeah, there's knowledge. A farmer has knowledge. Then a bit of that knowledge is extracted. And that's what's going on right now in my country through massive funding projects. Farmers are followed in terms of what they know. They're asked what they know. A machine doesn't know. A machine takes information. A trait in a seed cannot be invented. When Mr. Gates says he has helped invent the flood-tolerant seeds, no, it's been evolved by nature and our farmers. What he can do is take that trait, pirate that trait, extract that trait. So they're following the farmers for data mining, and then selling this back as big data, and the language used is big data is the new oil. Yeah, so it's a commodity. There's knowledge, extraction is data, selling back the commodity is big data. So when you put, when I want to use a tool, A, I want to understand the tool. Two, I want to ask, do I really need it? Yeah. Oh, you must take this lethal medicine, but why should I? I'm fine. The medicine might be very good, but I'm not sick. Yeah. So is the farmer sick in knowledge? Is the farmer deficient in knowledge? I think we have to ask that question. Then we have to ask the question of a system. What will this full system look like? The narrative is being spun as if it will be miraculous. But I am totally dedicated to knowledge. I'm committed to a life of science. And what we do with farmers, the two things we do with farmers is they know their soil, but they don't have microscopes. So we work with them on soil microbiology so they can see how their practices enrich the soil. So we take the best of ecological knowledge and the farmer's ecological knowledge and amplify that knowledge. One way in which small farmers can stay small farmers is share better amongst themselves, but then you don't need data mining. You just need communication systems. And I want to tell you an irony again. So on the one hand, we have digital agriculture and digitalization of India, and India's the one that's being pushed. It's the cutting edge digital colony. I've written about it in my book about the digitalization of currencies. So everything, I can't do anything with my bank without a digital system. I can't do anything anywhere anymore without going through the digital system. So what has been done with the farmers' protest? Internet has been shut down in that area. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh, this farmer might have a child whose fees has to be paid. And the fees can't be paid anymore because that's the system you're locked into. So communication between people is actually being shut down, while extractive systems of data gathering are being accelerated. And yes, the role is not data. Data is an ideology. There's a brilliant book for those of you who want, there are two brilliant books for those of you who want to go deeper into this. One is a book by Susanna Zuboff from Harvard. It's called Surveillance Capitalism: How We Have Been Reduced to Raw Material for Mining. We are the bauxite of the digital world. Yeah, we are the bauxite of the digital world. And the second book is a book called Dataism, that how thinking, faith, knowledge, science is being reduced and being replaced by a new religion of worshiping data. We shouldn't fall into that trap.
Thank you. I've just been locked out of Facebook, and the only way for me to get back in is to upload ID, just as an example of exactly what you're speaking of. So I'm going on a little fast from Facebook to relearn relationship without that particular mode.
Yeah.
Vandana, I'm getting so many questions that are responding to the passion and the systemic nature of what you're offering us. So I'm sorry, they're huge questions. How can we stop big corporations? Can you speak a little bit more about some of the solutions that come towards the end of your book of Satyagraha and our understanding about reality?
Yeah. So first, because we are being pushed into an age of illusion manufactured digitally, whether it be augmented reality or virtual reality, or the language of dematerialization, where our seeds are taken away from us, or our land is taken away from us. The ideology is used, it's dematerialization. When we face big power and very dominating and exploitative and unjust big power, how do we respond to it? I learned this from my own country's freedom movement, especially from Gandhi. So Gandhi did not mobilize armies. Gandhi realized that the empire at that time was an empire of cotton. And he said, if we start making our own cloth, then we'll be free. He didn't know how to spin. Nobody was spinning. The British had totally destroyed our textiles. Just like the food system is destroying our food. But he found an old woman. He asked her, do you know how to spin? And she said, yeah, I have an old spinning wheel in my attic. He said, teach me. He learned from her. Then he started schools. Well, my mother was a Gandhian, and we used to get up in the morning and spin, you know, that was part of your daily training, just like you brush your teeth. And when he was asked, he said, how do you think a few pieces of wood can bring freedom to a country? And he said, this is the only thing that can. Because first of all, a few pieces of wood can be assembled into a spinning wheel by people's own creativity. And at that time, people were making their own spinning wheels. And when the spinning wheel is in the hand of the poorest woman in the smallest hut, she will be a fighter for India's freedom, and nothing can stop that wave. Nothing can stop that wave. And that's why he made the spinning wheel and cloth our way of resistance. When I heard Monsanto and the others, Monsanto wasn't at that meeting, but the others, Bayer and everyone was at the meeting, and they were talking about doing genetically engineered seeds in order to take patents and having a global treaty called GATT, which became WTO, to make their next round of profits. I was shattered, and I said that they want to own life and they want to have an empire over life. And on the flight back, all the way, I was thinking, this was in Geneva, the meeting was in Geneva. And I'm thinking, and I'm drawing matrices, and I'm saying, okay, if that was the empire of cotton, and Gandhi took out the spinning wheel, today we have an empire of life. So what's the spinning wheel of today? And the seed came to me. And that's why I save seeds. Now that our food is under threat, I think we have to find our spinning wheels of food. And for me, it is what I started as the gardens of hope. We can have gardens everywhere. So how do you take on big powers? One, through the small. Because many smalls are bigger than one big power. And history has taught us that. The farmers, our farmers are being blockaded, and their nails on the road, and their internet is cut off, and their electricity is cut off, and everything is cut off. But they have gone back to the grassroots and are holding daily village assemblies, daily. And they're aggregating in the small and giving strength to themselves and to each other. So one is oceans of smalls make big. Yeah, drop by drop, we create oceans. So we have to be the drops. We shouldn't even try to be the ocean. But we have to know that there are other drops with whom we can work. The second thing is, I have learned this in my life, and I've lived through a lot. I've had a long life and I've lived through a lot. And I've learned that no one can take away from you the power to say no. And that is satyagraha. That is saying no through your conscience. Satyagraha is the force of truth, the force of conscience. Gandhi gave it this word. It's called civil disobedience. It's called all kinds of things. Thoreau did it, when he refused to pay the poll tax and said, I will not be part of a slave system. You can throw me in jail, but I will not support slavery. So refusing to cooperate. And the refusing to cooperate is multiple levels. In our times, it is, I think, refusal to cooperate in the propaganda of hate. Refusing to cooperate in this narrative of the farming of the future will be farming without farmers. Just refusing to cooperate by farming, by growing your food. That is civil disobedience. And the beauty of it is creating an alternative and resisting the destruction are the same thing. They're not two different things. Somehow I find that in the West, these became two different things. There was a lovely movement that do the gardens. And then there were the marchers who marched the street. And when I met Greta, I said to her, it's fine, march on Fridays, do the strike on Fridays. But the rest of the week, the earth needs your care. Do a garden. If with the school strikes on Fridays, you combine gardens the rest of the week, and every school becomes a place for regenerating the earth and regenerating our food sovereignty. What a movement. This is exactly what I said, Grow, at the Rio Plus 20 summit in Rio, when the religious people of interfaith meeting had gathered and you had invited me there. So we need lots of smalls, we need lots of gardens, and then this poison cartel will crumble. The digital empires will crumble. We have to know our reality. Part of, Naomi Klein has done a book called Disaster Capitalism after Iraq. We're living through a disaster capitalism now. So we have surveillance capitalism, making a disaster capitalism, and making people desperate enough to want augmented reality. Oh, I want you to go for a skiing holiday in the Alps. So they sell you a whole fake reality to think you are in the Alps. But each of these new things that are being sold are smart wear, watches that tell you how your heart is beating, and soon implants that will tell you, are you happy or not? No, we have to cultivate our consciousness more. That is the spiritual endeavor. The biggest, deepest resistance to this colonization of the ultimate violence and the ultimate greed is a conscience and consciousness. And that cannot be enslaved by anyone, anywhere.
Thank you. So much humility, connection to the soil, and the description of us as drops of water being so interconnected and in such visceral descriptions. I really appreciate that. I wanted to let you know that among the other amazing women that we have in this conversation, and men as well, but we do have Ila Gandhi with us, the dog.
Ah, Ilaben. Ilaben.
Yes, I think it's also true that so many women have worked tirelessly and are contributing and ready in their own ways for this complete renovation that you're talking about. One woman we've got on the call is Susan Hendershot. She was with you at our Eco Justice Forum. And Susan, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how the network that you've mobilized is addressing and continue to address some of both the root causes and the implications of what Vandana has been discussing.
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Dr. Shiva, namaste. I'm so grateful to be here with you today and just for your wise words and insight. And I am the president of Interfaith Power and Light, which is a national NGO in the US. Our mission is to inspire and mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And of course, this conversation around food and food sovereignty is so critical, both in terms of the care for the earth and the care for others in our world, as we know. So I'm really inspired by your words, and in particular, I wanted to ask you if you could say a word about how you think that people of faith can be involved in advocacy on food sovereignty and sort of what specific actions we can take. Our network works with people of all faith traditions and no faith tradition, but we know that many are still deeply spiritually grounded, even if they're not part of a particular faith community or a congregation. So just wondering about your insight on specific actions that we can take and specific advocacy that we can take on this issue of food sovereignty.
Well, I think communities of faith have a lot to contribute because all faiths began by fighting injustice. And the worst injustice is the denial of food. And it's not an accident that in all ceremonies, in all faiths, bread and seeds have a central role. You know, the Christians have the sacrament. And I remember I was with the patriarch in Greece, we were talking about what's the one big thing that people of faith can do. I said, just bring sanctity back to bread so that it's not a mechanical act of getting your sacrament, but bringing back all the knowledge, all the wisdom, all the reverence to food, because that's what needs activating in order to prevent our numbing towards food and therefore becoming not just zombies as human beings who stop thinking, but also as very sick human beings, because, you can wear bad clothing and it doesn't kill you, but bad food does. And we noticed in the pandemic that in my essay, I wrote the ecological reflections on the coronavirus, that those who are victims of food injustice were the worst victims of the pandemic. Because if you have diabetes because of bad food, your risks of dying with an infection increase 9.2%. If you have cancer because of toxics in the toxic food system, it goes up to 7.6%. And so I think all of this needs to really become part of the discussion. And I was talking to Grove earlier, and we will take this conversation further because there is just so much that movements of food can do by coming back to reality. When this disaster happened in my region just 3-4 days ago, I wrote a piece, and I wrote a piece on the sacredness of our Himalaya Ganga. And I said, how is it that we've got so alienated that we used to take instructions from the sacred? And now we blast the sacred. And I realized that India has had a spiritual tradition of materialism. We were spiritual materialists. We were ecological materialists. And for me, the walking embodiment of this was Gandhi, who understood this. And that's why he said, the earth has enough for everyone's needs, but not for a few people's greed. We apply that to food. The earth gives enough food for everyone's basic needs, but not enough for 1%'s greed. And if all the amazing learnings in the faith traditions can bring that discussion back, we will be able to prevent we will be able to trigger the commodification of food and the sanctification of food, but also reverse the zombification of the human being. And, you know, when I read this literature, I'm reading a book which I have to comment on, and it's quite amazing. They talk about autonomous machines, but dependent human beings. Autonomy is supposed to be about thinking, conscious human beings. These are supposed to be tools that we choose. So we are at a very, very, very interesting cusp. If we go down this way, not only is extinction a guarantee, but dehumanization in the middle is. And if we go the other way, then really a regeneration of being human and the planet is available to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And Susan, thank you for all your work with reducing the energy use and creating the collective voice of faith-based peoples to be able to have a big impact. We need so much more of that. Vandana, could I ask you to speak with us a little more about some of the technologies about communication? We've got a question about the 5G networks. And do you have ways of thinking about that's the new cell phone technology that's going to link us all? And you've begun to address it as you're saying, let's stop living this lie that that's the real life. But do you have more thoughts about that expansion?
Yeah. So, you know, if small bits of information have to be communicated, they can be communicated on a low electromagnetic wave. Yeah. So you get 1G, then you get to 2G, then you get to 4G, and then you can start putting images. And 5G is central to the two things that are being imagined. You know, it's not necessary, but it is necessary for that edifice that they're thinking will be governing the world. The first is, if every farmer has to send a photo of every leaf of every plant to Mr. Bayer or Mr. DuPont to tell them what is the pest or what should they spray, can you imagine the heaviness of data that has to be communicated? Now, the heavier the data goes, the more the electromagnetic intensity of the wave must become. And 5G has actually the frequency of a microwave. Yeah. And you put food into a microwave and it cooks, or you put a cup of water and it becomes boiling. Well, that's what it'll do to everything around. The second is when, you know, low intensity waves can travel far. But these intense systems need to be boosted very, very frequently, one, but more, this entire, you know, they call it the fourth industrial revolution, they call it the Internet of Things. You know, if you've become so lazy that you won't even get up and switch off your light, and you want to live in a smartphone where Alexa will tell your switch to switch it off, you know, that's the kind of applications, yeah, that you won't walk to find out who's at the door. Alexa will tell you who's at the door. And these are basically taking the lazy, you know, the lazy road to industrialism faster. Yeah. Alexa is a way to make you stupid. And I'm very proud, last year with my team, I found that my government had allocated a huge budget to have Alexa teach our children eating right. How to eat right in this land with so much diversity. So I immediately worked with my team And, those days I was for zipping around. I gave them some ideas, and then we had this piece. I think it should be up on our website. It should be somewhere. And we said, Amma, which means mother and grandmother, not Alexa. The source of knowing what is eating right will come from our grandmothers. So if every home and every person has to be fitted into the surveillance capitalism, then you need a lot of surveillance instruments. Therefore, you need 5G in every neighborhood. If every farmer has to be sold big data, then you need 5G all over the countryside. But a lot of doctors are worrying about the fact that there is very high intensity radiation. And people are talking about bees dying dead, birds dying dead. A lot of people in my valley are saying the birds suddenly disappear when they put up a few towers. And there has not been an auction for 5G yet. But the other day they came to update my internet connection, and it's showing 5G. It shouldn't exist. It should not exist. It hasn't gone through the regulatory process. So 5G, the surveillance capitalism, and digitalizing everything and industrializing our relationship with everything, it's all one package. It's not separate elements. It's all one package. And that's why you have a convergence of the communication technologies, the information technologies, the biotechnologies, the health technologies, big pharma, they're all becoming one consolidated power. And we talked about food as a currency. And they're working on electromagnetic power. But that also means there'll be a new level of electromagnetic pollution, which is a pollution. And a lot of, just like people didn't look at the aluminium demand for windmills.
Right.
We are not looking at the energy demands of the digital world. And I did last year, I think on Environment Day, I wrote a piece on this. So before we go whole hog into this, you know what one server takes? I mean, the server of Bitcoin in Iceland takes half the electricity of Iceland. One Bitcoin transaction takes as much as a whole household's energy for a whole month. So we are, this is such a huge energy demanding system.
Wow.
But because we don't see it, it's not physically in front of us, it's somewhere far away, the server's far away, the trucks of Amazon zip around. So we're entering a world without being allowed to know what it is and make a choice about what it is. And that's why for me, the issue of consciousness is be conscious of this world and be conscious of who we are in a real world. But our real world is a sacred world. This crass materialism took the sacred out of materialism. And now they're taking materialism out of matter. But they're grabbing all of the matter. They're grabbing the land and the seeds and the energy. And we need, all of us need to be much more awake. We should not be sleepwalking into this.
Vandana, I was laughing because this is how I usually check the weather. Instead of going to the window, I go to my phone. So your description of what's happened is very, very accurate. I just want to say we've got about 10 minutes left. And for our next question, I'd like to introduce Audrey Kitagawa, who is the chair of the Parliament of World's Religions, where Vandana, you've spoken for us there for the last 2 parliaments. So Audrey, would you please take the floor?
Thank you so much, Grove, and thank you so much, Vandana. I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you. And my question is this: to what extent do you think that the GDP as an indicator of economic well-being, which is fundamental to the SDGs and the universally adopted indicator of economic well-being, actually has reinforced this zombification of our conscience and consciousness that has turned people themselves into commodities of the globalized marketplace based upon our consumption habits and appetites?
Many years ago, I was invited by the Sydney Opera House to address exactly this thing. And they asked me to speak on growth. And there's an essay that came out of this, which is called Growth Creates Poverty. What is growth? Growth is the measure of extraction. How did GDP get created? During the wars, they needed more money to finance planes and the nuclear bombing and the bigger armies. And this mobilization of money was by taking wealth out of society, because till then, wealth was measured as what circulates in society. So they took the wealth of society out by redefining growth by saying, if you produce what you consume, you're not producing. So women's work went to zero, so subsistence work went to zero, peasant economies went to zero, and the financing of war was done by the GDP. This continued then because, those who were making money out of this said, wow, what a brilliant measure. And now it's an addiction tool, because governments can be very, very friendly with their cronies by justifying it in the name of growth. And then the image created is the cake must grow bigger. But the problem is, this kind of growth is what has led to the accumulation of wealth in the hands of the 1%. So the cake gets bigger and bigger and bigger for the 1%, and even the basic bread disappears from the people who work, the people who grow food, the people who run all our systems of care. So GDP is a mismeasure, and it has become a justification of the violence against the earth, the violence against human beings, and the commodification of all life, as you're saying. So we have to move beyond, and fortunately, this has started. So I work with Bhutan, which said we won't measure GDP, we're going to measure gross national happiness. And I've just been appointed to the foundation, the World Happiness Foundation, where true measures and true indicators of well-being are being given priority. And some third party doesn't tell you you're feeling well or you're feeling happy. We have to create conditions in which communities can have better happiness and better well-being. So again, all this is related. Can you imagine? They're actually talking about, 99% humanity will be useless. They're talking about farmers won't be needed. But then they'll have to be kept busy, right? Otherwise they'll create trouble. And the smartphones and gaming will be the way to keep people distracted through a new digital addiction, just like the opioid crisis in America was the way people dealt with unemployment and loss of jobs because of a globalized outsourcing. We cannot live life as full human beings through addictions. And that's why centering our consciousness, our humanity, and our being part of the earth as part of what people of faith need to do. And I think the Parliament of World Religions has such a big role to play in this moment of history.
Thank you so much, Vandana. We've got a few minutes left, and I'm going to try and just push you to address the urgency in the short term that so many people are feeling. And also to all of the people that we wish we could give voice to, would you please, once we end the seminar, email your questions, groveharris@gmail.com. I would be happy to try and plug you into the different resources and writings so that we could continue this discussion and get back to you, Vandana, about next opportunities to have another engagement like this. But people are asking, really in the short term, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, there's concern that our food systems will actually collapse and that we've not got our local systems in place enough. Would you care to advise on immediate steps?
So, for those who worry about time not being enough, it takes a second to change your thinking, 1 second. And therefore, the most immediate thing we can all do is shift our paradigms, change our assumptions, and basically remove all the blinders that have been set. And that is basically living reality, seeing truth. The second is building local food systems. Don't begin by trying to build the system. Begin by what you can do. That one seed you can save, the one potted plant, the one community you can be part of. The system. Systems grow from living systems. Those who put systems together from the outside and engineer them create totalitarian systems. All living systems of evolution grow from the small, and then they cooperate. The seed goes, sends out its roots, the mycorrhiza grows, meets the roots, the plant grows, the pollinators come. We don't put the system in place from outside, we just plant the seed. And that's why the second thing we have to realize, and that's what I've tried to say in my book, Oneness versus 1%, that because the world is interconnected, your piece of it has to be the right action where you are in your context. The rest gets taken care of by the amazing interconnectedness of life. You are not Mr. Atlas carrying the earth on your shoulder. You are a lovely little being in a very complex web of life. And the third is there are movements. You know, the fastest growing movement is the food movement. Even in England, it's where all of the policy is make Brexit a really bad food system. Organic is growing hugely. So there are large numbers. You know, when we think theoretically, we think, oh, how will I begin it? I think first is put the ego aside. Just take it and put it in the garbage. It's not about you. It's about the potential in you, but the potential to serve. The potential to serve the earth and your community. And look around you and you will find amazing things happening. But you have to look around. And my work now this year is really to look more deeply as who's creating gardens. Such huge movements on seed saving have grown as a result of Navdanya seed freedom movement. This is now a global movement. The only thing we have to be careful about is not panic. Not panic because, you know, I've lived through so much in terms of slavery and lived through India's learning of freedom. The two lies the enslavers will always tell you is we're liberating you. The civilizing mission was, oh, you're primitive, we are liberating you from your barbarianism. So they always want, enslaving is liberation. And the second thing always is, they make such an exaggerated image of their power and what they can do. Don't believe that. Live your power. And when you live your power, you realize they're little pygmies who've got inflated egos. I shouldn't say that actually, because pygmies are pygmies and they have a right to be indigenous people. But English has taught us such bad metaphors. The other day I used the metaphor of Shylock because we were taught Merchant of Venice in school, and I've suddenly realized, oh my gosh, because we've been groomed in a certain colonial education, and certain language comes through. But I celebrate the small, but the giant, who is an inflated ego, is not largeness in terms of consciousness. So we have to start putting the consciousness at the center and see people, actually look at this new form of big power as a very sad expression, a sad expression. And we have to then expand the spaces for love, expand the spaces for cooperation, ahimsa, Ilaben is here, ahimsa and nonviolence, that has to be our path.
Vandana, I thank you so profoundly. You are sending us out as seeds of great potential rather than as commodities. So much hope and wisdom in what you've said, and we will need to continue to follow through on this conversation. We'll put out any resources that you'd care to suggest in our next e-blast. So people in the chat who have been asking for resources, we'll make sure that we get them out to them. And again, thank you so much. Susie, over to you for the final closing.
Thank you everybody for joining us for such an amazing, informative and wonderful talk. And I would also just like to say thank you so much to Dr. Ila Gandhi for joining us as well, for Professor Meher Master Moose as well for joining us from India, and Susan Hendershot and Audrey Kitagawa from our Interfaith sister organizations, and of course to Marcus and Mary Braybrook, who are joining us as well from England. So thank you so much. And Dr. Vandana Shiva, you are the light in the world. We thank you so much for all of your work. Thank you so much, dear Grove, and everybody from around the world. Thank you for joining us. This is a recording. It will be available on our website. Please share. Thank you so much, everybody. Namaste.
Thank you.